One of the key insights from this project, as we saw, and from the UN 75 findings, is the need to empower civil society leaders and youth networks. And one of the effective media for creating public awareness is art and culture. And it is precisely in this context that I now have the rare privilege and a pleasure that few people have, unless of course you're presenting the nominees in a major category at the Academy Awards, to present Ms. Jane Fonda. Ms. Fonda, you're not only a megastar, but also a champion for women's rights and education, an advocate for the youth, and a prominent environmental activist whose most recent weekly climate actions in Washington, D.C., known as the Fire Drill Fridays, have inspired widespread participation in a very short time. Ms. Fonda, we're very grateful that you're making the effort to join us from the West Coast of the United States, where it is still quite early, and it is my great pleasure to invite you to address the conference. Please.
Thank you very much, David. I'm really honored to have been asked to speak today on this closing panel. From the invitation, I saw that the conference is meant to forge strategies to promote an integrated approach to human security in a time of the interconnected crises of COVID-19 pandemic and the climate crisis. I think there are three other global crises that are actually related to climate and COVID: racial injustice, economic inequality, and the crisis of democracy. And since addressing the climate crisis properly necessitates making deep structural changes in how our societies function, why not do it in such a way that begins to solve all of them together? It's really important, I think, that we understand that the climate crisis cannot be solved sequentially. The climate crisis cannot be solved sequentially. We don't have the luxury to confront the pandemic and then climate. They have to be addressed together with true urgency and in such a way that fosters democracy. And it's too late for moderation. We are very close to an irreversible tipping point with atmospheric warming. There's a new production gap document that shows that between 2020 and 2030, global coal, oil, and gas production will have to decline annually by 11% for coal, 4% for oil, 3% for gas, to be consistent with a 1.5 degree Celsius pathway that scientists are calling for. But instead, government plans and projections indicate an average 2% annual increase for each fuel. We have to mobilize and demand big, bold, brave actions from our leaders. And yet too many of those leaders label those who call for emergency measures as alarmists and say that the measures they demand are too expensive. Really, too expensive. Well, what is the right price tag then to prevent civilizational destruction and the sixth mass extinction, especially given that scientists tell us we can prevent a lot of that if we act right now? You know, all of us alive at this last moment, when hundreds of millions of lives hang in the balance with every half degree of warming we either enable or avoid. The young activists know this because it's their future that's been put at risk, right? And we absolutely must not fail them. I want to quote Greta Thunberg. She says, quote, "If the emissions have to stop, we must stop the emissions." To me, that is black and white. There are no gray areas when it comes to survival. Either we go on as a civilization or we don't. We have to change. It would appear that a 17-year-old student with autism has a lot more clarity than a lot of our leaders. Okay, so what needs to happen? Well, think of a pair of scissors, right? For scissors to cut, it needs two blades, right? The same is true for the climate crisis. One blade must be investing quickly and robustly in the green renewable energy sector. The other blade must be ending fossil fuels. We can have all the solar panels and wind turbines in the world, but if they keep drilling and fracking, we're not going to make it. The science says we need to stop all new fossil fuels immediately, right away, no new permits. And then we need to immediately begin a phase out of what's already being pumped so that we're at zero emissions before mid-century. And while we demand that trillions of dollars of stranded assets are left in the ground by the fossil fuel industry, we mustn't allow the workers and communities impacted by this energy transition to become stranded assets. The workers can't be the stranded assets. Federal governments need to work with local governments, labor, environmentalists, and communities to rapidly develop plans for a just, fair transition for the impacted workers and communities as we move to a green energy sector. Now, while much can be done locally, only central governments have the ability and resources to bring the needed investments to scale fast. And we need to ensure the focus is on cleaning up and providing green jobs for the peoples and communities who've been disproportionately harmed by the climate crisis and the pollution from fossil fuels and refineries. The same peoples and communities most harmed by COVID, by racism, and poverty. Unlike fossil fuels, solar and wind energy grids can be decentralized, even locally owned, thus achieving energy democracy. And unlike fossil fuels, renewable energy is everywhere. So there's no need for costly wars and invasions. Climate scientists warn that we should not rely on claims that in the future bioenergy with carbon capture and storage will be a solution. Therefore, emergency efforts must be made to bolster and heal the natural systems of carbon drawdown. On land, this means ending deforestation and vast reforestation. It means fundamentally altering our systems of food production from industrial mechanical tilling of monocrops to restorative agriculture, such that soils are once again able to sequester carbon, resist flooding and erosion, and provide healthier food. This would mean the return of family farming and food democracy. Ending fossil fuel emissions and the production of single-use plastics will allow our oceans to heal, which will improve their ability to sequester carbon. Now, the other blade of the scissors, the creation of a vast green renewable energy sector, is a massive jobs manufacturing program, building smart energy grids, electrical vehicles, charging stations, wind turbines. And let's make sure these union or union equivalent jobs go to former fossil fuel workers and to the most disadvantaged by race, poverty, and the COVID pandemic. This can lead to economic democracy. Human rights, local jobs, and diversity are important to think about because currently too many of the big green energy companies involved in mega projects are replicating the same bad behaviors as the fossil fuel industry did. They have weak human rights policies and practices. They look for resources in cheap locations that they can control and ride roughshod over the rights and health of local people. Do you know that currently renewable energy ranks as the third most dangerous sector for people defending their lands? Only mining and agribusiness are more dangerous. Professor Alberto Mataran, a professor of urbanism and land management at the University of Granada in Spain, points out that the renewables industry is increasingly concentrated in the hands of a few. In the wind energy sector, for example, 5 wind turbine manufacturers alone make up more than half of the global market share. And at the same time, workers are increasingly concentrated in those same countries. Of the 11 million green jobs created in 2018, 4 million were in China. And there's Europe, where some renewable energy companies have started moving to countries where labor is cheaper, which means increasing numbers of their green employees are left jobless. The same transparency that is beginning to be demanded of the textile and tech industries with respect to their suppliers should also be demanded of the renewable energy sector. They must respect land tenure, good labor practices, the rights of indigenous people, and must share the benefits of renewable development with local communities, both for the sake of those communities as well as for their own reputation. Alongside the green energy jobs are the jobs needed to make our countries more resilient in the face of extreme weather events. Retrofitting buildings, strengthening our dams, bridges, roads, sewage and water systems, reforesting, cleaning up toxic sites. And the COVID pandemic has made clear the need to pay attention to the low carbon caregiving jobs, the ones that keep society going when crises hit, often called women's work. No longer should home care, nursing, teaching, childcare, delivery and postal services, restaurant and food service, they should no longer be part of the gig economy. These workers must be shown the respect they deserve. And this means they must earn a family supporting wage with benefits and paid sick leave. Now, in my country, the United States, to accomplish all this, it's not a multi-billion-dollar effort. It's a multi-trillion-dollar undertaking. And I'm sure that's close to the truth in other countries. And it means we need to embrace systemic economic and social change and replace our own mindsets. We need to get over the idea that deficit spending is bad right now. You know, Oliver Blanchard, the eminent former chief economist of the International Monetary Fund, is talking about a shift in fiscal paradigm. And Nobel Prize winning economist Paul Krugman says, quote, "The new paradigm suggests that both public debt isn't a major problem and that government borrowing for the right purposes is actually the responsible thing to do. Neoliberalism and austerity must be thrown out. They've had their chance and failed utterly. Climate change in particular is the biggest example of market failure that we've ever seen. We all know that it's not just climate crisis we face an empathy and justice crisis as well. The fabric of our societies is unraveling. So while we move with great speed to solve the COVID pandemic and avoid a climate catastrophe, we need to simultaneously mount an assault on poverty, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, misogyny, colonialism, and despair. And we can do this. As writer activist Naomi Klein says, failure to do these difficult tasks in time is a choice, not an inevitability of human nature. We are not doomed unless we choose to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Fonda, for your profound, compelling, and such deeply informed remarks. Thank you very much again for enriching our conference with your participation and your altogether incredibly valuable contribution. Thank you.